This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week, we honor the year in music for 1987, along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1987. We also deal with the controversy about whether the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is quote-unquote woke. Plus, our Spotlight Hall of Fame is the Grammy Museum Hall of Fame in Los Angeles, California. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. The year was 1987. In music, alt-rock continued its journey from college radio to the mainstream, thanks in large part to the influence of MTV. Bands like Husker Du, Dinosaur Jr., and Sonic Youth began to break through a little, and if you hung out in your local record store, then you might have heard the rumblings of some bands in Seattle called Soundgarden and the Melvins. The hair band era got jump-started by Bon Jovi that year, whose second album, Slippery When Wet, became a mega-selling album and unleashed a ton of copycat bands. Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue, meanwhile, was clinically dead after a heroin overdose, but was revived by paramedics. Lucky guy. In country music, Randy Travis had the biggest album of the year with Always and Forever. Other artists with big albums included Alabama, Hank Williams Jr., George Strait, Reba McEntire, The Judds, Restless Heart, Dwight Yoakam, and an album that had the combined talents of Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, and Emmylou Harris. Artists with big country singles included Randy Travis with Forever and Ever, Amen, Michael Johnson, The Judds, Dan Seals, Reba McEntire, Merle Haggard, Highway 101, The Forster Sisters, Roseanne Cash, and Ricky Van Shelton. Hip-hop continued creeping up into the mainstream as LL Cool J, Boogie Down Productions, better known as BDP, Eric B. and Rakim, and Public Enemy made noise. LL's second album, Bigger and Deffer, was released, which had the first hip-hop ballad to become a hit called I Need Love, and it also had his iconic song, I'm Bad. Public Enemy debuted with their album, Yo Bum Rush the Show. Kool Moe Dee had How You Like Me Now. Heavy D and the Boys had Mr. Big Stuff. Eric B. and Rakim had the legendary Paid in Full and also Move the Crowd. Ice-T had the album Rhyme Pays, BDP had Criminal Minded, Audio 2 had Top Billin', and Eazy-E released the song Boys in the Hood. Dance music on the charts was still populated by pop and R&B artists like Madonna, along with Jody Watley, ABC, George Michael, and Janet and Michael Jackson. If you were in Chicago or Detroit, however, then you were probably hitting the underground clubs like the Warehouse in Chicago to listen to two forms of dance music that were going through the club scene at the time, house and techno music. If you were in Great Britain, though, then you already felt the tremors of EDM as Steve Silk Hurley's song Jack Your Body became the first house track to hit number 1 on the Billboard singles chart. Also, freestyle group Exposé broke through to the mainstream when their song Come Go With Me hit number 1, while Company B hit number 1 with the song Fascinated. 1987 was also the year that Kraftwerk hit the top of the dance charts in America. In Latin music, the biggest artists of the year were Jose Jose, Juan Gabriel, Braulio, Emmanuel, Jose Feliciano, Los Buques, Los Tigres del Norte, Little Joe, Vicente Fernandez, and Los Yonex. Bands that formed in 1987 included Alison Krauss and Union Station, Alice in Chains, Animal Logic, Third Base, 808 State, The Bullet Boys, Danger Danger, Danzig, Diggable Planets, Digital Underground, After 7, DC Talk, Delirium, Bad English, Blues Traveler, Femme Fatale, Fugazi, Calloway, The Gin Blossoms, Green Day, Guy, Giant, Inner City, Jagged Edge, The Jungle Brothers, Kid and Play, The Jesus Lizard, Meat Beat Manifesto, Mars, Lunachicks, The Roots, Ugly Kid Joe, and a little-known band called Nirvana. Might have heard of them, maybe. Bands who called it quits, at least until the inevitable reunions or took an official hiatus, included the Bay City Rollers, Baltimora, Berlin, the Mary Jane Girls, Modern English, Nena, the Smiths, GTR, General Public, Husker Du, the Violent Femmes, Twisted Sister, and the aforementioned Mars, who put out one album, had a worldwide Eurodance hit called Pump Up the Volume, then broke up, all in 1 year. Bands that actually did the reunion thing in 1987 included the Doobie Brothers, Leonard Skinner, and Prism. MTV Europe started in 1987, as did Kylie Minogue's career when her version of the song The Locomotion became a hit. Whitney Houston became the first female solo artist to debut at #1 on the Billboard Albums chart when her sophomore album, Whitney, was released. Elton John had throat surgery that left his voice lower. The Ka-single, or cassette single, made its debut in 1987. The first Ka-single to be released, by the way, was Bryan Adams' song Heat of the Night. Another big music business event happened on November 18th when CBS Records was bought by Sony Music for $2 billion. U2 released the Joshua Tree album. Michael Jackson released the album Bad. Prince released the album Sign of the Times. Pink Floyd released their first album without Roger Waters called A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which became a huge hit. Def Leppard released Hysteria, and Guns N' Roses released Appetite for Destruction. George Michael's Faith, INXS's biggest selling album Kick, and the Dirty Dancing soundtrack all came out late in the year, with the success of those albums mainly being felt in 1988, but still technically 1987 albums. The top 10 best-selling albums of 1987, according to Billboard magazine, were Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet, Paul Simon's Graceland, thanks mainly in part to his Grammy Award wins earlier that year, the Beastie Boys' License to Ill, Bruce Hornsby and the Ranges' The Way It Is, Janet Jackson's Control, U2's The Joshua Tree, Huey Lewis and the News' 4, Cinderella's Night Songs, Anita Baker's Rapture, and Genesis's Invisible Touch. The top 10 best-selling singles, according to Billboard magazine, were the Bangles' Walk Like an Egyptian, Hearts Alone, Gregory Abbott's Shake You Down, Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody, a classic song, Starship's Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, Robbie Neville's C'est La Vie, Whitesnake's Here I Go Again, Bruce Hornsby and the Ranges' The Way It Is, Bob Seger's Shakedown from the Beverly Hills Cop 2 soundtrack that came out that year, and Bon Jovi's Livin' on a Prayer. Musical artists who were born in 1987 include DJ Afrojack, rappers Meek Mill, Kendrick Lamar, Wiz Khalifa, Bow Wow, Justina Valentine, Jay Park, and Dougie Pointer of McFly, singers Frank Ocean, Aaron Carter, Diana DeGarmo, Kevin Jonas of the Jonas Brothers, Marcus Mumford of Mumford & Sons, Dan Reynolds of Imagine Dragons, Brendan Urie of Panic at the Disco, Tyler Hubbard of Florida Georgia Line, Dan Myers of Dan and Shay, Kesha, and Jesse McCartney. Musical artists who passed away in 1987 included Paul Butterfield of the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, the founder of the New York Blue Note Jazz nightclub, Alfred Lyon, which is a legendary nightclub by jazz standards, entertainer Liberace, guitarist Bola Sete, singer Dean Paul Martin Jr., French singer Dalida, cellist Jacqueline Dupre, bassist Jaco Pastorius of Weather Report, drummer Buddy Rich, Marina Augusta Von Trapp of the Von Trapp family, who became famous because of The Sound of Music, the movie, singer Maxine Sullivan, drummer Carlton Barrett, and guitarist Peter Tosh of Bob Marley and the Wailers, who was murdered in Jamaica in a home invasion. For the Grammys for music for 1987, U2 won Album of the Year for The Joshua Tree. Paul Simon won Record of the Year for Graceland. Somewhere Out There from An American Tail soundtrack won Song of the Year, and Jody Watley won Best New Artist. At the MTV Video Music Awards, Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer won Music Video of the Year. At the American Music Awards for the music of 1987, Whitney Houston, Paul Simon, and Bon Jovi were the big winners, and the Billboard Music Awards didn't actually start until 1990. Therefore, no awards that year. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Belgium that year, Ireland won for the song Hold Me Now. At the Tony Awards, Les Miserables won Best Musical, and All My Sons won Best Revival of a Musical. Musically, at the Academy Awards, The Last Emperor won Best Film Score, while I've Had the Time of My Life from the Dirty Dancing soundtrack won Best Song. The Pulitzer Prize for Music was shared between John Harbison for The Flight into Egypt and Stephen Albert for Flower on the Mountain. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held on January 21st at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. At the ceremony, record executives Ahmet Erdogan, Jerry Wexler, and Leonard Chess, along with record producers Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, were all inducted into the non-performers category. Louis Jordan, T-Bone Walker, and Hank Williams Sr. were all inducted into the Early Influencers category. In the Performers category, Aretha Franklin became the first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Other performers who were inducted into the category included the Coasters, Bo Diddley, Marvin Gaye, B.B. King, Bill Haley, Roy Orbison, Carl Perkins, Clyde McPhatter, Smokey Robinson, Muddy Waters, Jackie Wilson, Big Joe Turner, Rick Nelson, and this next artist. Eddie Cochran was born in 1938 in Albert Lea, Minnesota, but moved to Bell Gardens, California while he was still a kid. And it was in California where he was able to get his music career going. He started off his career in junior high and actually quit high school as a freshman in order to become a full-time musician. During a show, he met Hank Cochran, who was not related to Eddie, and the two of them formed a group called the Cochran Brothers and recorded a few singles that were moderately successful. They didn't stay together for too long, though, only about a year or so. Eddie started making solo records in 1956 after getting signed to Liberty Records. He released his only album while he was still alive, Singin' to My Baby, in 1957. Liberty Records wanted him to become a crooner due to his good looks and his habit of wearing nice clothes, so on this album there were not too many of his rockabilly songs. But soon, he was getting hit songs that were getting worldwide attention, like Come On Everybody, 20 Flight Rock, Something Else, and Teenage Heaven. He also appeared in a few films because of his good looks, including The Girl Can't Help It and Untamed Youth. The song Summertime Blues is probably the song that everybody knows him for. He co-wrote the rebellious song about dealing with authority with his manager Jerry Capehart. Eddie recorded it on March 28, 1958. The song was originally a B-side, but became a hit on its own when it was released on July 21, 1958. The single went to number 8 in America. The song's also been covered by a number of artists, including the Beach Boys, country singer Alan Jackson, and 60s group Blue Cheer. Unfortunately for Eddie, he didn't live too much longer to enjoy his success. After his friends Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens died in the plane crash in 1959, known as the day the music died, Eddie thought that he might end up dying young as well. Unfortunately, he was right. On April 16, 1960, Eddie was coming back from a concert in England with singer Gene Vincent in a speeding taxi, unfortunately, because the taxi blew a tire and spun out of control, hitting a lamppost. Eddie was thrown from the car and passed away from head injuries. Eddie Cochran was only 21 years old when he passed away. During his brief life, he wrote and recorded rockabilly songs that captured teenage life in the 1950s. He also wasn't afraid to try out new technology and recording styles, including distortion and overdubbing. He was also very talented, having played 4 different instruments: guitar, drums, piano, and bass. As with most artists who passed away when they're young, his legend only grew afterwards. His style influenced everyone from Bruce Springsteen to Jimi Hendrix to the band Rush to Tom Petty. You name it. If you bent the notes on a guitar, then you were influenced by Eddie Cochran. It was his signature innovation. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987 in only its second induction class. Such was the importance of Eddie Cochran, and such was his importance, especially about his songs about rebellion. Presented for induction by Mick Jones of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 2003 inductees, The Clash, Eddie Cochran. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, class of 1987. Before we get to the rest of the podcast, we'd like to tell you about our other podcast, the Music History Today podcast. Every day we tell you what happened on that date in music history, along with music releases, birthdays, and passings. So, if you like this podcast and want more music history, then please search the Music History Today podcast in audio or video form on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. A few weeks ago, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame released its list of finalists for this year's class for the Hall. For those of you who missed it, the performing category will have George Michael, Sheryl Crow, Kate Bush, Willie Nelson, The Spinners, Missy Elliott, and Rage Against the Machine. DJ Kool Herc and Link Wray received the Musical Influence Awards. Chaka Khan, Al Kooper, and Bernie Taupin received the Musical Excellence Award, and the Ahmet Ertegun Award went to Don Cornelius. Now, I usually have my list of snubs and head scratchers when they release the list every year. I mean, Soundgarden got snubbed again? Plus, the Spinners, much like Lionel Richie last year, have left me with blood in my mouth from biting my tongue too hard. But I digress. The reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because there is outrage, especially online and especially on YouTube, from a bunch of over 50-year-old red hat wearing far-right beer-belly dudes about the class being too diverse, and accusing the Hall of being, my favorite word of the last few years, woke. I'll get to that word later. I get where some of them are coming from. After all, this is usually where I point out the artists who should already be in the Hall but aren't as of yet, and a lot of those are older rock acts. Let's start, however, with the criteria for actually getting into the Hall, which states that the artists who get in are the ones whose, quote, originality, impact, and influence have in their own way changed the course of rock and roll, end quote. That doesn't mean that strictly rock music gets into the Hall. In fact, the first class inducted wasn't all rock and roll. There were blues artists and Motown and R&B artists. Every type of music has either influenced rock music or rock music has influenced it. When the Hall first started, it was accused of being run by a bunch of non-musicians whose tastes in music were strictly classic rock, with maybe a little R&B thrown in for good measure. That has changed in the last 5 years or so as the Hall has changed leadership and have decided to let other people have a say in who gets inducted. That also means that more diverse music, like country and hip-hop, is beginning to get in, and that is a good thing, not a bad thing. The Hall needed to get with reality and realize that music isn't strictly a bunch of hard categories. White people don't just make hard rock, and black people don't just make soul music. Sometimes rock acts even do things like disco, like the Rolling Stones releasing Miss You or Kiss releasing I Was Made for Loving You. Both of those are straight up disco songs that have guitars in them. Even everyone's favorite machine gun shooting rocker Kid Rock made his celebrity not in rock music, but as a rapper, in case you forgot. Add to this the fact that strictly rock acts are getting less and less because we're going through a period over the last decade or so, for better or worse, where rock music has gone dormant. I won't say it's dead because something usually pops up every now and then. However, as I pointed out a couple of episodes ago, when I read the lists of artists who will be eligible for the Hall for the first time next year, quality eligible rock acts are beginning to become few and far between. That means that the Hall needed to finally start inducting other genres that have either influenced or have been influenced by rock music. Otherwise, the induction ceremony would end up being held every 4 years at a local Cleveland diner. Now, there are some people who don't like that reality, much like they don't like any reality that wasn't spoon-fed to them by 4chan and Fox News. They would rather pretend that only white people should be inducted because in their eyes the Hall should only be for rock and roll is white. Well, it's not actually white. Sorry, kids. As I have stated numerous times on this podcast, rock and roll was taken from country music and especially the blues, black music. When rock and roll was first done, it was done by black artists like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Fats Domino. Radio disc jockeys, especially in the Jim Crow South, refused to play the music, calling it the N-word music. Literally, the N-word music. And no, I'm not going to say the word. Of course, it was easier to digest once the music was then stolen and given to white artists like Pat Boone to sing the exact same songs, i.e. Little Richard's Tutti Frutti, which Pat Boone then took and became a huge hit. For Pat Boone, not for Little Richard. Then people started saying that the music was actually white music and then locked black artists out of all the money that was being made from it. It is not the first genre to do that, by the way. Jazz did it almost 100 years ago, and more recently, you could say that hip-hop has started doing it. Definitely EDM has done it since it was started in the underground clubs in Chicago, New York, and Detroit by blacks, Latinos, and gay people, and then got mixed up with the drug culture overseas, especially in England, and has now become something where you can count on your fingers the number of black DJs who are very successful, like Afrojack, Carl Cox, and Black Coffee, and that's about it. Even the phrase rock and roll was stolen because it was originally black slang for sex. So now the far right has stolen the word woke, which was also black slang for being enlightened, and has turned it into a catch-all phrase to mean, I guess, owning the libs? For the record, I'm a moderate independent, not a liberal or conservative, not a Democrat nor a Republican. But seriously, stop using the word woke, please. None of you really know what it means, especially you politicians who always stumble when someone asks you to define it. Also, I'm pretty sure that what I just said will now get me banned in the state of Florida and some other states for being, quote, critical race theory. But it isn't. It's just the hard truth. Handle it, people. So, for those of you who are complaining that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is too diverse and not, quote, white enough, end quote, get over it. Music is for everybody, and every genre is for everybody, no matter what your color is, no matter who you love, or what gender you are. Your kids understand that. Check out their playlists sometimes. They listen to every genre. It's high time some of you adults got it as well, especially you in the over 50 crowd. I will, however, give you the argument about the spinners, though, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one. Also, really? No Soundgarden? Ugh, Hall is frustrating sometimes, I'm telling you. This week's Spotlight Music Hall of Fame is the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, California. There are actually 3 Grammy Museums now, with one in Newark, New Jersey, and the other in Cleveland, Mississippi, to go with the main one in L.A. The Recording Academy runs the museums, but has been inducting members into its Hall of Fame since 1974. The main Grammy Museum itself, with its Hall of Fame wing, opened in 2008 at LA Live, which is the downtown LA complex that has what used to be known as the Staples Center, where the Los Angeles Lakers play. The museum has 4 floors, including a theater. Some of the past exhibits there have paid tribute to John Lennon, Roy Orbison, Latin singer Jenny Rivera, and the world of hip-hop. Plus, they have ticketed evening discussions with artists such as Debbie Gibson. Ticket prices are normally $18 for adults, $15 for seniors and military members with ID, $12 for college students with ID, and also for kids 5 through 17. Children 4 and under and museum members are free. Its normal hours are Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., and closed on Tuesdays. But you should always check the museum's website to see if and when it is open, as their times and also their ticket prices shift depending on the season. GrammyMuseum.org is its website, and we will throw that into the show notes. Let us go to the year 2008. The Grammy Museum inducted 8 albums and 7 singles into its Hall of Fame that year. The genres spread from opera to jazz to classical music. There were only 4 songs that you would consider pop or anything even remotely modern. There's the song Alfie from Dionne Warwick, Dead Man's Curve from Jan and Dean, Breezin' by George Benson, and Janis Ian's classic At 17. In the opera category, there was a recording done by the RCA Victor Orchestra, conducted by Fritz Reiner, and the Robert Shaw Chorale, which was conducted by, Robert Shaw. The recording was on the RCA Red Seal label and was recorded in 1951. The opera itself has a rather controversial story concerning its creation. In 1875, this opera was first performed after the controversy surrounding it almost derailed the performance. The opera is about a gypsy girl who seduces an army corporal named Don Jose, who was engaged at the time. After being seduced by the girl, Don Jose helps the girl escape trouble with the cops, only to himself be put in jail. He then deserts the army in order to be with her. And as with every great love story, the girl kicks Don Jose to the side for a bullfighter, and Don Jose, of course, can't handle it. It is an opera after all. So he kills her by stabbing her. Ain't love grand? Also, why does every great love story end up with somebody dead? What's up with that? Maybe they're trying to tell you something. Anyway, that is where the controversy kicks in. The Opéra Comique in Paris, France, where the opera was being staged, was known for family-friendly productions. Doing one where someone gets killed was not going to fly. Members of the production's leadership got into a heated battle over it, and it got to the point where one of them quit because the composer wouldn't change the script. The scandal was so hot that big actresses of the day wouldn't even try out for the part of the main character. It was that toxic a controversy. But finally, On March 3rd, 1875, the opera premiered. At first, it was met with halfway decent reviews. However, as time went on, people began to warm to the opera, and it eventually became a classic, including being inducted into the Grammy Museum Hall of Fame. The composer, unfortunately, did not live long enough to see his opera become successful, having had a heart attack and dying only 30 performances into the opera's run. The composer, George Bizet. The opera about the seductive gypsy girl, Carmen, premiered in France on March 3rd, 1875, and a 1951 recording of the opera, as performed by the RCA Victor Orchestra and the Robert Shaw Chorale, was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, California, in 2008. And that is it for this episode of the Music Halls of Fame podcast. For more podcast episodes, which drop every Thursday in audio and video form, then please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, CastBox, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from.